Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to tackle one of the most, scrutinized events in all of history, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I mean, think about it. This one claim has shaped entire civilizations, yet it's still so intensely debated. So the real question is, what does the historical evidence actually tell us?
It's funny. The Apostle Paul, one of the key figures in early Christianity, he's the one who set the stakes incredibly high. He basically said, look, the entire Christian faith, it all hinges on this one single physical event. For him, this wasn't some nice metaphor. Nope, it was the linchpin. If the resurrection didn't actually happen, the whole thing just crumbles. Okay, so how in the world do you even begin to investigate a claim this massive? Well, we're going to follow a really clear path. First, we'll unpack why this event is so darn crucial. Then, we'll dig into the earliest evidence we have. After that, we'll explore the big alternative explanations that people have come up with, check out the transformation of the key players involved, and then, see how all these pieces fit together. All right, section 1. So, what makes this claim so different from, say, other religious stories? Well, the early Christian sources, they don't talk about the resurrection like it's just some spiritual idea or a feeling. No, they frame it as a real historical event, something they believed you could actually investigate. And that framing, that's our starting point. And get this, according to the Gospel of John, Jesus himself threw down the gauntlet. He offered his own resurrection as the ultimate sign, right? The final proof of his authority. He basically said, hey, this is going to be a public, verifiable event. This wasn't some private spiritual journey. It was a public claim about his own body. So to really build a solid case, a lot of historians, even skeptical ones, start with what's called the minimal facts. Now, what are those? They're basically the core points that are so well supported by the evidence that a wide range of scholars, including critics, agree on them. The idea is that any credible theory, whether it's natural or supernatural, has to be able to explain this specific set of data. It's our foundation.
Okay, so where do we even start looking for the earliest evidence of this belief? You might think, oh, the Gospels, right? But what's really fascinating here is that our earliest evidence doesn't come from the Gospels, which, were written a few decades after the events. Nope, it comes from a source that's much, much closer to the original moment. And this timeline is absolutely key. I mean, just look at how quickly these core beliefs took shape. We are not talking about generations and generations of legends slowly developing over time. The belief in Jesus' death and resurrection was basically formalized into a creed within just a few years, while all the eyewitnesses were still around. And here's the creed itself. When the Apostle Paul writes this down around 55 AD, he's super explicit about it. He says he's passing on a formal tradition that he received. This isn't something he just invented on the spot. He's making it clear that he's just a link in a chain of information that goes way back. And that's exactly why scholars, even the really skeptical ones, find this creed so significant. All the clues are right there in the text. You've got this formal language of delivered and received, the use of the Aramaic name Cephas instead of the Greek Peter. It all points back to a formula that was created in the very earliest Jerusalem community. Back when the people who actually knew Jesus were still there to say, yep, that's what we believe happened. Okay, so given these foundational facts we've laid out, the empty tomb, the appearances, and this incredibly early creed, what can possibly explain them? Now, this is where the investigation gets really interesting. Let's start weighing the most common alternative naturalistic theories. All right, so let's put these theories to the test, right? Let's line them up against the data we've established. The real challenge for any one of these explanations is simple. Can it explain all the pieces of the puzzle at the same time? We're talking the empty tomb, the appearances, and the birth of the Christian movement. Let's see how they stack up. First up, the hallucination theory. Could the disciples have just imagined it all, maybe out of grief? Well, modern psychology is pretty clear that hallucinations are private, individual experiences. They don't happen to big groups of people all at once, like the 500 people Paul mentions. And more importantly, this theory leaves one huge question unanswered. What happened to the body? A vision doesn't move a corpse. Okay, so what if the disciples just stole the body, right? Well, this theory completely collapses when you actually look at how they behaved afterward. These guys were hiding, terrified for their own lives. It makes absolutely no psychological sense that they'd suddenly risk everything to steal a body, make up a huge story, and then go on to face persecution, torture, and death, all for a lie they knew was a lie. And that right there brings us to another critical piece of this puzzle. And honestly, it might be the most powerful circumstantial evidence of all. We're talking about the radical, undeniable transformation of the disciples themselves. The big question is, what on earth could cause such a profound change? I mean, the change was just jaw-dropping. They went from this scattered group of terrified men literally hiding behind locked doors to these courageous public speakers who basically turned the Roman world upside down. Think about it. Their leader was dead, their hopes were completely crushed, and yet within weeks, they're out in public in the very city where he was executed, proclaiming his victory over death.
And look, this wasn't some casual belief they held. It was a conviction they were willing to pay the ultimate price for. Early Christian tradition is pretty solid that many of these key figures, even former skeptics like Jesus' own brother James and Paul, the persecutor, they all died for this belief. And the argument here is really powerful. People might die for a belief they think is true, but would they die for something they knew they had just made up?
And that's a point that scholars who argue for the resurrection, like Kreeft and Tischeli, really drive home. They basically say that this kind of sudden, profound, group-wide transformation, it demands an equally powerful cause. It had to be something more than just a clever story or some shared delusion. So, where does that leave us? After looking at that incredibly early creed, after testing the alternative theories, and after seeing the powerful human testimony, what conclusion does the evidence actually point to? Where does this whole historical trail lead?
You see, the strength of the case for the resurrection isn't really about one single gotcha piece of evidence. It's about its cumulative power. It's what historians call an inference to the best explanation. You just line up all the established facts, the empty tomb, the appearances, the transformation, and you ask a simple question. Which hypothesis explains all of them in the most effective way without creating a bunch of new problems? And so, the argument comes down to this. The idea of a literal bodily resurrection is the one theory that its proponents say accounts for all the data. It explains the physical evidence of the empty tomb. It explains the appearances. It explains the origin of that ancient creed. And it explains the explosive birth of the Christian movement right in the heart of the city where Jesus was executed. So, in the end, we're left with this set of extraordinary claims and a really interesting collection of historical data. The early Christians, they staked their entire lives on this event. So after weighing all the evidence we've explored today, the question really comes back to you. What best explains it all? Thanks for digging into this one with us.